Okay, good morning to the Board of Bureau of Standards and Management, I assume, and also the PS from Ministry of Trade is here. Yes. So first of all, thank you all very much for coming, and we're happy to have you here, and we look forward to a fruitful engagement of questions, answers, and dialogue. This meeting is being held in public and is being broadcast live on the Parliament Channel 11 and also on Radio 105.5 FM. And it is also on Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Viewers and listeners can send their comments related to today's topic via email parl101@ttparliament.org, or they can send it to facebook.com/ttparliament or at Twitter @ttparliament. I will begin by asking the Permanent Secretary to introduce himself and the members from the Ministry of Trade, if there are other members here, and also then after that the chairman of the Bureau of Standards and his board members who are present. And in fact, all the members who are here, if you could introduce yourself by telling us not just your name, but what you do in the organization, okay? Thank you very, very much. I will, after the introduction, what I will do is that I will ask the chairman of TTBS to make an opening statement, and then following that, we will start the questions, okay? So could I start with the PS?
Good morning, Chair and members, and all listening. We are thankful to be here this morning. And my name is Norris Hilbert, Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Trade and Industry. Would you like me?
Yeah.
To my immediate right is Mr. Dennis Scott, Manager Alliances in the Ministry of Trade and Industry. To his right is Ms. Trudy Lewis, Acting Senior Economist of the Ministry. And in the row behind is Ms. Janice Paris, Monitoring and Evaluation Coordinator in the Ministry. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. And Chairman, you and your board members and management.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have with me here this morning two board members, Mr. Andre Aubuland, who heads up our Audit and Finance Committee of the board, and Ms. Trudy Lewis. She's also on the board.
Okay.
As far as the executive is concerned, Mr. Theo Reddock, who is the executive director acting, Ms. Nadira Mohammed, she's the financial controller, Mr. Gerard Maxwell, he heads up the implementation division, and Ms. Michelle Patterson, she is our HR head, and Mr. Keith London, who is our marketing officer, and our legal officer is Sidel Marshan. She acts as the secretary to the board.
All right, you didn't introduce yourself, Mr. Dupré.
I am Lawford Dupré, sorry, chairman of the board.
All right, thank you very much. You want to give us a brief statement before we begin the questioning? Yeah, okay. Or perhaps I should introduce the members of the committee first, and then you do the statement. Well, I'm chair. I am Botiwari, member of Parliament, Caroni Central, and I will ask the members, starting on my right, to introduce themselves.
Senator Melissa Ramkey-Soon.
Adrian Leon's member.
Tahar Kobika, Vice Chairman.
I am Randall Mitchell, a member of this committee.
Good morning. I'm Ayana Webster Roy, member.
Okay, thank you very much. You may proceed.
Great. Mr. Chairman, thanks for having us here this morning, where we will have an opportunity to respond to your questions. The Bureau has been in operation for some 20-odd years, more like 40 years, sorry, I got my timing wrong. But we operate at Macoya. We have a building there, and we operate from that base. The Bureau is governed by, I think we indicated, the Standards Act of 1997. We also are empowered by the Metrology Act of 2004, Cabinet Note number 553 of 1996, and of course the Trinidad and Tobago Implementation Statement to the WTO in 1998. These are the guiding pieces of legislation and documentation that enable our activities. So we are here to answer your questions and give you the responses as we are able to.
Okay, well, again, thank you all for coming and welcome. I will start off with a few questions, and then we will go around the table, and members of this Public Accounts Committee will ask you questions as those questions come to mind. We've had the benefit of the documents shared with us in which you have answered some of the questions posed to you in writing. So that would be sort of background to what we do here. But the first question I have is, Mr. Dupré, could you, Chairman, would you give citizens an idea of the strategic role that TTBS plays in the development of the country, really? Many people will hear TTBS or Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, and they may have an idea what it is, but they may not fully comprehend what it really does and what difference it makes to the economy or to the development process. Can you explain what that is for us?
Mr. Chairman, the primary focus of the Bureau is in the area of quality. We are a body that was empowered by the Standards Act to create standards which are both voluntary and mandatory standards, aimed at protecting the citizens with respect to the quality of goods either produced or imported into the country. We do not have any mandate or responsibilities with respect to food and drugs. That is handled by the Food and Drugs Division. We only deal with things of a manufactured nature, basically, or things that affect the welfare of the citizenry with respect to the environment and safety. So for instance, we have compulsory standards I'll give you an example of the quality of bleach that is purchased by customers. We have compulsory standards that affect roofing sheets. Our what do you call it? Voluntary standards act as guides to other agencies, which they can implement on their own behalf. And I'll give you an example of that. The effluent from industries is covered by a standard, which is a voluntary standard, which the EMA enforces. And similarly with the wiring code, which is a voluntary standard that is implemented by the Electoral Inspectorate. So we have a number of these standards, and we develop these standards by way of committees of experts who we bring together at the Bureau, and through their interventions and discussions and expertise, we develop the written version of the standards. And this then goes to the board. The board is empowered to approve voluntary standards, but with respect to standards that we recommend for mandatory status, these are passed to the ministry for their determination. And it's the ministry that gives us that approval.
All right. Could you give citizens, taxpayers, what it costs to play this role?
You're talking about the budget of the Bureau?
Yes.
I'll ask the financial controller to respond to that. The changes.
Sorry. Morning, everyone. The budget that we have for the current fiscal year is currently at 61 million.
61?
61 million.
Okay, so $61 million is the cost of your operations. How much of this does the taxpayer pay by way of subvention from the state?
This year, our allocation is 10 million.
So you get 10 million from the state and you earn 51 million?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Is it possible to operate without a subvention from the taxpayer? I know that you have never done that, but is it possible? I mean, if you were given that mandate then, and it was said to you, listen, in 3 years' time, what we are going to do is we are going to cut the funding over the next 3 years, and in 3 years' time, we'd like you to be self-sufficient. Is that possible?
Mr. Chairman, that is a possibility.
Yes.
We would have to broaden and intensify the other areas in which income is possible.
Okay.
And these would include things like laboratory accreditation, inspection services, and things like that. And of course, the Metrology Act would also give us some form of revenue. So this is all before us, and these are things that we are looking at currently.
Okay. Do you generate any hard currency earnings, foreign exchange?
We do generate some foreign currency, but it's fairly small in comparison to what is required.
Yes, okay. But in total, you generate about $50 million, TT dollars.
50 million TT, yeah.
Yeah. If I had to ask you, what is the value for money that the taxpayer gets? Could you answer me? You don't have to tell me everything. If you mention 2 important things that the taxpayer gets in terms of value for money from the TTBS for an operational cost of 60 million, of which the taxpayer contributes 10 million.
Morning, Chair. I'll take that one. The Bureau has several functions that we would have outlined. The first one, of course, is the development of standards which are available to the national community for application in various areas of endeavor and to guide industrial and other activities for the benefit of the country. Yeah. Historically, people tend to focus a lot on the mandatory aspect of the standardization, but the voluntary standards have a lot of potential for very wide application and for application, as the chairman would have given examples of application in conjunction with legislation to ensure that the legislation can be kept up to date with changes in technology and be more flexible in the context of, well, in comparison with acts and regulations, which tend to take a lot longer to develop. So that's one aspect. Then we have the compulsory standards themselves, which are enforced by the Bureau, and there are several of them. And we gave some examples, and we churn them out as we are able to properly enforce them. The Bureau also has conformity assessment activities, certification. We certify management systems, quality management systems, environmental management systems as well. We also develop special certification schemes for Trinidad and Tobago, one of which is the TTIC system, actually which is now in abeyance because of the changes in the tourism sector. But for a number of years, the TTIC certification was applied to providers of services in the tourism sector. We also are active in the area of laboratory accreditation, where we accredit laboratories, medical laboratories, and calibration and testing laboratories that may be mostly industrial. Along with that, in the enforcement of the compulsory standards, we have basically two halves of the coin. One is, by far the largest activity is inspection of goods coming into the country that are governed by compulsory standards. That's our most extensive activity. We are beginning to build up now mandatory certification for the certification of products locally manufactured that we think are important in areas of health and safety. So our first venture into that area is roofing sheets, which was just recently developed, and we have a couple others to follow. We have responsibility for the Metrology Act as well, and in that regard, legal metrology, which is the area that is most familiar to people, it's basically like weights and measures, just a bit deeper of a process. And we've started working in that area since the proclamation of the Metrology Act in 2015. We've covered the area of weighing machines at present, and later this year, we want to start looking at fuel dispensers, gas stations, that sort of thing. That area can be extended into much further into other areas, depending on what Trinidad and Tobago considers to be important. And then we have our technical barrier to trade activity, which is now starting off. That is a requirement of Trinidad's membership of the WTO. Technical barriers to trade tend to focus around standards and technical regulations and the conformity assessment issues that I spoke about earlier. So I suppose it was a very convenient mix for TTBS to be put in that particular area.
Okay, well, you gave a more comprehensive answer than that I expected, but I'll just take two things for the ordinary citizen to appreciate and understand. One is that you create the conditions for the setting of standards, both voluntary and mandatory.
Yes.
And the end result of that is that a citizen or a consumer can be assured of quality when they make a purchase. So that's one issue. And because of the standards that you establish and the certifications that you give, you also sort of make it easier for an export product from the country to be accepted elsewhere. All right? I know you mentioned others, but I'll just mention those two things because those are two pretty valuable things. I'll ask you one more question and then I'll pass on to my colleagues. Now, when you made your initial statement, Mr. Dupré, you talked about the fact that you were not responsible for food and drugs, that there is a different framework for health, safety, environment, and you had the EMA involved in certain things, and you were largely focused on manufacturing. Does this present a situation of disjointedness for you and for the management of standards and quality in the country and for synergy? Or do you have an operational or working relationship with these other institutions that allow you to look after the country's business properly in a collaborative way?
Well, I think certainly there is opportunity for closer collaboration between the Food and Drugs Division and the Bureau. However, over the years, there's been some resistance to this, and perhaps the Ministry of Trade might be able to elaborate a little bit more on this, but we certainly see opportunities for greater collaboration with them.
Okay. P.S., would you like to comment on this? I remember somewhere in the back of my mind that there was an attempt to kind of synergize health and safety, food and drugs related issues and TTBS responsibility for quality and food and drugs and the difference between those two. Did we make any progress on this?
Chairman, for a while now, this has been an issue, as you said. And we have, in the Ministry of Health, we have the responsibility there for food and pharmaceuticals, I think pesticides. And over on the Bureau side, we have the other items. There have been many attempts to bring the two together, but you always have a turf issue because I think health thinks that standards is more aligned to health and as opposed to commerce and economy and that sort of thing. And when the Bureau of Standards, the perspective is a different one. Back in 2013, around 2013, 12, 13, 14, we had a committee which we tried to bring together to solve issues because we realized we weren't getting the institutional blending. And that resolved some issues, but many issues remained outstanding, and that committee went into abeyance. So the problem is still there. Now, the problem is one at the local level, but then at the international level, our partners aren't too interested in whether it is with the Bureau of Standards or Health. They are concerned with Trinidad and Tobago's treatment of those issues. And at that level, the TTBS is normally our coordinating agency. So if we have at the regional level at COSQ, they are the agency. If it's at the WTO with the inquiry points where technical regulations are either being established outside, and we have to collaborate with our businesses and so to see whether we have any input or recommendations or changes. The Bureau is the agency. If, on the other hand, we are developing standards and we need to share it at the WTO level with the rest of the 100 and so countries, then the Bureau is the one who communicates those technical regulations. So what I'm saying is that clearly there is a coordinating role for the Bureau, especially when it's external, but internally, the efficiencies of the internal arrangements, like for instance, Jamaica has both interests in one agency, and they can't understand when they have to deal with goods. Why
we're so fragmented.
Yes, why we're so fragmented. So it continues to pose a problem.
Okay, so I didn't intend to ask this question now, but I want to ask it since you raised it. I mean, you have the coordinating role for the outside, and that means that we have to take care of what happens inside in a seamless way in order to make that possible. If we have a problem, it is not the outside world's problem, it is our problem. So you have a coordinating role. Do you have any power that comes with that coordinating role in your view?
In my view, the Standards Act is very straightforward, and it confines the role of the TTBS. And the Food and Drug Act confines the role of the Chemistry, Food and Drugs. So unless there is a new piece of legislation...
So you require legislation, that's what I was getting
to change that. It will pose a difficulty, even though administrative arrangements may work from time to time.
Okay, so administrative arrangements, in your view, will not work effectively You would have to have super cooperation to make that possible. But legislation could bring it into effect. The synergies between these two agencies, which are important for our international competitiveness.
Yes, I do believe that you need some kind of legislative intervention to cross-fertilize the responsibilities in terms of its delivery,
Chairman
especially
Dupré,
where enforcement is concerned.
Yeah, Chairman Dupré, are you of that view as well?
Most definitely, Mr. Chairman.
All right, okay. I pass on now to Member Webster Roy.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions, and they're specifically on Tobago, right? So, Mr. Reddock, when you were giving your submission earlier, you mentioned something about standards in the tourism industry. Would you be able to explain the reach and the impact of the Bureau in terms of the tourism sector in Tobago?
Sorry. Of course, we are in a period of change as far as the tourism sector is concerned. So I would comment on what existed before. And the TTEC program that we ran was active both in Trinidad and Tobago. It was taken originally as one program, and then eventually there was a Trinidad and a Tobago arrangement to be made. In latter years, we have had difficulty in finalizing contracts with the tourism division of the THA, but we certainly had very extensive discussions on the issues. The matter of costs, transport, and that sort of thing were the main problems that we had. What we found with TTEC, though, is, in our opinion, that's the TTBS, programs, certification programs like the TTEC are not complete. They indicate compliance or non-compliance to the standard, and then they have to be taken further. There was always an issue, not only with Tobago, but in general, as to how those results were to be treated. We also, well, the TTEC would define compliance with standards that were developed, so we would have developed a number of tourism standards. And I think we will continue to do so once there is that interest from the tourism bodies.
What are some of the standards that you would have developed?
We would have developed standards on hotels and guest houses, tour operators, sites and attractions. Those are a few of the areas. Of course, I could supply you with a comprehensive listing of all the standards that we've done.
So when TTIC was in operation, you had tour guides who were certified through the Bureau?
Yes.
As well as guest houses and hotels?
Yeah.
When that process was ongoing, would that have made the destination more attractive?
Well, the understanding we have is that the standards define a base level of performance. What our interest would have been, as far as is possible, that every supplier of services would be above that base level, and therefore a visitor could be assured of certain basic services. There was always the discussion about looking at peak achievers, but the TTEC program was not really designed for that. It was really designed to ensure that you have a base that is acceptable generally.
Another question, and moving off from the tourism sector now and into construction. I'm aware that you, from the submission, that you provide testing on construction material, right? Does that include concrete?
Yes, I think, yeah, the chemical side of cement, not concrete. We don't do concrete. But concrete, there are a number of installations in the country that test concrete.
So
it's not a rare thing.
Which agency or which body would determine that the concrete, what you use to build, the actual finishing, the concrete you mix in,
yes,
is up to a certain standard so that when somebody constructs a house, it doesn't crumble, that all the different providers in Tobago and Trinidad who provide the concrete, that it meets a certain level of standard and quality. Who is responsible for that?
Well, I can say that generally, because of how ubiquitous concrete application is, that's a fairly general kind of activity. We have standards for the cement itself.
Okay.
The idea is, and we also have standards for reinforcement steel. It's difficult to look at every single, well, for one entity like the TTBS, to look at every single instance where concrete is mixed, but there are many engineering construction entities that would have the capability of checking the concrete while it is being used, applied, while it's still soft, and then there are tests that you can apply afterwards. Generally what you do is when you mix the concrete, you form cubes and keep them, and then at certain periods, 3 days, 7 days, 14, 28 days, you test them for strength. And like I said, I know that can be done at Kariri, and there are a number of other engineering companies that would do that.
What areas in the construction industry would you focus on?
Well, again, as the chairman would have said, we tend to focus more on the products themselves. So similarly, cement, steel, we have standards for blocks, roofing sheets I mentioned earlier. Those, and well, of course, we have the wiring code, which is applied by the electrical inspectorate as well.
So we have a few companies in Tobago are making blocks. You would go out and ensure standards are met. So you'd visit these people. We haven't developed that program in blocks as yet. That is something to come on.
Yeah, that's something that we're looking at developing probably in the end of this fiscal year, the beginning of the next one, 2018, 2019.
And those manufacturers in Tobago would be monitored?
Well, it would be everybody. The thing is that we would have had certification programs in the past, but they were voluntary. These new certification programs are mandatory.
Okay.
So that the idea is that if you're not compliant, you wouldn't be, your products wouldn't be on the market.
Okay, thanks. I have some more questions, but I'll ask them after.
Thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Chair. And I want to take you back to the period under review, 2009 to 2013. From all indications, your finance and accounting function was extremely weak. You provide certification services with respect to quality, particularly the ISO standards. 9001, quality in terms of management. Can I ask you, is the Bureau of Standards certified, ISO certified, in management function?
Yes, we are. We actually are certified to ISO 9001 general. Oh, sorry. Yes, we are certified to ISO 9001, which is the general functions of the Bureau. We also are accredited to ISO 17025 for the laboratories, and recently our inspection function has been certified to ISO 1720.
Were you certified during the period 2009 to 2013?
Yes, we would have been.
Okay.
Yeah, 2004.
So, can you tell me what accounts for, well, let me stick to your receivables, because there appears to be a problem that you have with receivables and revenue recognition and reconciliations and so on. Your management letters during the period indicate that you have a problem with a high level of aged receivables. What accounted for that problem during that period?
Okay, for the period under review, like you mentioned a bit earlier, we had a number of issues or challenges within the unit. What I can tell you, because I joined the organization in fiscal year 2014, using the management letter as my guide to correct moving forward, we have since engaged necessary resources to bring those receivables at a level that we can manage. We have tightened our collection drive, and as it is now, the instances that we had in the past of not collecting, we no longer have a major issue in there.
I'm happy to hear that, but can you tell me whether that deficiency affected your certification with the international standard? That's one. And two, can you tell me during that period, on an annual basis, how much money was lost due to the provision of bad debts? How much money was statute barred that you could not collect? Because I'm seeing that since 2004, you've had this problem of aged receivables.
Okay, in 2015, we did make a provision for bad debt. That provision was approximately $1 million. It's actually reflected in our audited financial statements.
The issue that you have raised there is one that has sort of confounded the organization for a number of years. In 1997, when we embarked on developing the organization to be able to handle all the different TBT-related areas, there was a lot of expansion in the organization. The staff grew quite a bit, and the organization was working very hard at trying to get its services taken up in industry, trying to get people to accept the work that we were doing. And I suppose that our attention was focused very heavily in that area. No, the finance area did not play a significant part in the certification of the organization. The standard in those days wasn't focused that much on those particular aspects. And also, probably because of that, the Bureau itself tended to focus on the areas that we know we would have to be regularly assessed on. We recognize now that it's critical to ensure that that function matches the rest of the organization, and in a way it has tended to lag behind a bit. So what we can say now is that we are working very assiduously to improve the functioning of that aspect of our work, and to ensure that it keeps up with the development of the rest of the organization.
So just to capture what you said, you're saying that your ISO certification deals primarily with the operation side of the business.
Yes, it does.
And you're now working to get your support functions up to an international standard, yes, so that too can be certified.
Well, we don't necessarily have plans for certification, but the fact is that we are now required to present our accounts to the international standards for financial records. So we will ensure that we are up to that mark. Certification is something that we have.
But don't you think certification should be on the cards? Because if you're providing $1 million provision for bad debts,
yes,
you expect to lose $1 million, wouldn't it cost maybe $1 million or even less to get that function up to a standard that it can be certified, up to an international standard?
Well, we intend to get it up to international standard, and certification is an option that we could consider.
Just if I could just add, the focus that this board, which came in November of 2016, is to have all of the financial statements completed, all the backlog completed, and for next year to be in compliance with the requirements of the Standard Act. This year, 2018. So that has been the message to management, and the board intends to see that that is discharged. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. In Mr. Reddock's introduction, he spoke about the lab services provided, and I just wanted to get some clarification. Is it that once you certify an external lab, they can now do calibrations of equipment and measurements and so forth on products?
I think it's important to note, first of all, that there isn't a requirement in Trinidad and Tobago for labs to be accredited for them to operate, right? That's not the case. In fact, that's one of the things that we would like to be considered, especially in particularly risky areas. But at present, accreditation of labs is a voluntary process. Labs that believe it's going to add to their attraction as a provider would take that step. Usually what happens is once a couple labs in a particular industry go, then the whole group will eventually go. We've seen that happen with the environmental labs. And we're hoping that we'll have that type of snowball effect in other areas.
So is it that Trinidad and Tobago only recognizes the Bureau of Standards Laboratory Services as the sole tester of calibration of these weights, length measurement devices?
No, not at all.
Okay.
There are labs that offer calibration. One of the jobs in the Standards Act, in the Metrology Act, eventually, is that we will have to have some sort of certification scheme for these labs. We're working on that right now.
So,
but at present, they operate.
okay.
Our facilities, not all of them, but some of them are accredited. Some of the tests are accredited. Some of the calibrations are. And we encourage people to use services from accredited labs.
So this is only a voluntary service then, and we can accept any kind of measurement from any lab that is functioning in Trinidad and Tobago. That's what...
Well, generally, that's
yes?
the case. One of the things that we've done in the case of medical labs is we've introduced a proficiency testing scheme. So far, all the medical labs in the public sector, in the state sector, are part of the proficiency testing scheme, and a lot of the private labs are also part of it.
But medical is not under you. We're just talking about products and
well, in accreditation, yes,
and mass
yes.
and temperature.
But for medical labs, yes, we would accredit them as well.
Under your remit.
Yeah,
again, voluntary.
Yeah.
Okay. And there was one of your responses, you spoke about the TTBS link, which is an automation process to replace your manual system. But then you listed some challenges with like human resources and IT, and also the offshore help desk that is still outstanding. Do you want to just share with the committee what is the status of this? Well, what is the benefit of going automated? Maybe the cost is going to, how it's going to impact you, and really if it is beneficial at this time.
The TTBS link is really a portal out of the Ministry of Trade that links the Ministry of Trade with Customs at Secuda. Through that mechanism, our inspections, which would take place at ports of entry, get their data through that system. So it's really a national system that we are part of. I think I'll let Mr. Maxwell expound on it. It's his department that deals directly with it.
Okay, good morning, committee. The TTBS link and the Bureau's involvement in it, first of all, I must say it has been a major success. And many gains were made from it. But we have to understand that during that period of time, Trinidad and Tobago was moving, and the trade apparatus was moving from a paper-based environment to that of something that was electronic. So it was a quantum leap, I think, in the area of trade facilitation, of which the Bureau was one of the organizations. So we have had many challenges during the course in terms of that early adoption period. But as the years went by, with more fine-tuning, more interactions from very supportive staff from the Ministry of Trade and the single electronic window, the TTBS link secretariat, we've been able to iron out some of the challenges that you would have seen there. So those challenges were very time-based.
Mr. Maxwell, not to cut you across, so this is something that has been completed? This system, this automated system, has been completed? Yes,
the automated system has been completed. There was a launch in 2014, November 2014. And during the period of time, as I said, with any type of IT-based solution, it would have had its bugs, it would have had its difficulties, the Bureau would have had its challenges, and working with the Ministry of Trade and within the TTBS, we were able to iron them out. In fact, the project has gone to a next level where we're actually strengthening the single electronic window. So it has gone into a new phase. So we're continuously on a developmental path with these, with the single electronic window TTBS link.
And so this is a, sorry. Oh, sorry, Pierre, okay.
Chairman, if I can just interject here, because the TTBS link, as you know, comes from the Ministry of Trade and Industry. It is not belonging to the Ministry of Trade, and it belongs to all of Trinidad and Tobago. But the point is that our effort, and this started a while ago, has been to really increase the efficiency with automation. And the Bureau of Standards has been one of the agencies. There are a number of agencies, but Bureau of Standards is a key agency in terms of the inspection at the border in particular. And we have moved it a great step forward, but there are many stages to go. One of the things we have done is to reduce those things that don't require inspection, to have it automated so that the Bureau doesn't get bogged down with treating with those, and it makes for greater efficiency. We have a challenge with the payment mechanism, and that has to do with a broader national problem of paying for services. You might be aware of it. So once that happens, that will add to the efficiency. In addition, we have a project with the IDB, and we have many components. And for instance, one of the key elements there is the business process reengineering, and that is to take place at all the stakeholder agencies that are impacted by the system. And that consultant started on Monday. And we expect that when we do treat with the Bureau, like we will do with many of the agencies, that increased efficiencies will result and the system will benefit in a major way. There are other things like change management and those sort of institutional arrangements, but we do believe that the Bureau would be a major beneficiary beyond what has been achieved to date with the system.
Could give Senator Ramkissoon a quantitative assessment based on your intuitive sense of where you are percentage-wise in terms of where you have to go to have this automated system functional and working in the national interest?
I know my own sense, and it's just a guess, I would say that we may be about halfway where we really ought to be. And because the first half was a very significant half, where one had to go to the point of business to do business, so you can now sit and once you have your TT Connect ID and your broker, and so you can conduct your bureau activity. The issue, as I said, there are some elements that require not only the inputs of the project, but a lot of supplementary action, and those we are working on. So the project, I think, is supposed to be for the next 5 years, and during that time, you'll have incremental improvements. So we do expect that by the time it is finished, the Bureau would be very efficient in terms of their role in the arrangement. Customs is an integral part, the single electronic window in the ministry is another part, then there are other agencies. So as a whole, you see, you require the synergies of all to really get the benefits that one would want under the system.
You know, when I think about things that we are doing in this country, for instance, the integration in the Ministry of Finance and with your national budget and your PSIP allocation and the integrated nature of that, and the necessity of that for having on-time information access, timely information access every day that you go. When I think of your project, which is BizLink and the Asecuda system and all of these things that make for the efficiency of the movement of products and services, and you tell me 5 years, and for the finance and PSIP thing, they tell me 3 years. I realize that in Trinidad and Tobago, we're not serious about watching how fast the world is moving ahead of us, you know. There are many ways of becoming backward, but one of the ways of becoming backward is to mark time and to go at snail's pace when the rest of the world is moving with the technological speed of the swiftness of light. And that is where the world is headed. And I don't know, there seems to be a lack of urgency in Trinidad and Tobago at almost every level about how we do things and how fast we do things and how quick we get engaged with the rest, where the rest of the world is headed. And I find it extremely frustrating sometimes. And I am sure that there are other people who share my sentiments and views, and it's a matter for real concern. Anyway, I go on to Member of Parliament, Adrian Leon.
Thanks, Chair. Question in terms of your internal audit capacity. What is the reason for the absence of an internal audit unit?
Traditionally, the Bureau just never had an internal audit function. In our new management structure, we have included that function in the new management structure. That process, that development process of the management structure seems to be a very lengthy one. So we have decided that since we have a regular operational internal audit function, for the various quality systems. We will include the accounts in that function, develop the appropriate policies and procedures, which is what the system is based on, and specifically employ external resources to conduct annual internal audits, but we will use our internal machinery to check on the progress and ensuring that the findings of the audit are taken care of, and then we can test it all with the external audit process. And we'll want to roll out that activity certainly for the existing financial year to come. But there just was no tradition of that function within the organization, and as I said, we have plans to introduce it, but we also have plans to take care of the function while that process is taking place.
Oh, okay, well then how is it then? Ms. Mohammed raised the point that approximately 61 million for operation, and there's a 10 million subvention. What then is the justification, or how does that justification go to the PS to approve that subvention of 10 million without that internal auditing function?
Okay, if I can just clarify, of the 61 million that we have allocated in our budget for the current financial year, 75% of that cost relate to our staff cost, right? The remaining 25%, basically goods and services, transfers and subsidies, and purchase of fixed assets. The subvention that the Bureau receives is strictly for the payment of salaries for our permanent staff. So when a submission is made on a monthly basis to the ministry, they look at that monthly report and determine the amount of subvention to be released.
Okay, so the subvention is specifically to salaries?
Salaries for permanent staff only.
Okay. When looking at your accounts, it seems to be an increasing value in debts. When looking at your trade and other payables, what is the strategy to either stop the increase or reduce that figure?
Okay, our trade and payables, the balance that you are actually seeing in that report includes an amount for the accrual of salary arrears. So if we were to break down the balance that you're seeing, it comprises trade receivables, which at that time would have approximated 1.5 million, and the remaining amount would have been accruals for salary arrears for the period. If you're looking at the 2013 balance, it would comprise an arrears for the period 2008 to 10, plus an additional accrual of approximately $10 million for the period 2011 to 2013. As a result of salary negotiations, we had negotiated at 14% for that period, 11 to 13. That would have basically accounted for that balance.
Okay. Well, clearly you have salary issues in terms of monitoring, managing how much income you have and the output. You have a quality unit. How does that quality unit improve your value for money in terms of the operation of the Bureau standards?
Okay. The quality unit coordinates the work of the different parts of the Bureau in their own operations and in their own improvements and developments. Our quality unit also functions as a performance monitoring unit as well, according to the strategic plan, the plans for the specific period, and the scorecards, balanced scorecards that we have for the particular parts of the Bureau. So they combine those two sets of activities to ensure that the work happens when it's supposed to happen at the necessary levels of quality, that we follow our own rules, and also to ensure that where we have problems existing, we can identify them and prepare action plans and work on ensuring that we could mitigate them. And that operates generally throughout the organization. The point that we made earlier is we tended not to include all of the accounting functions in that, and that's what we intend to change. But of course, accounts is a special area that requires specialist attention. So we would have to take care of that specialist attention in order to ensure that we can include that in the process.
So are you saying then there would be a revision in terms and engagement of the employee to compensate for the lack of the accounting functions of the organization? And if yes, would there be further negotiation of their salaries to compensate for their additional work?
That may have occurred in the past, and from time to time that may happen, but generally what we have done in recent times is that we've tended to, recognizing the gravity of the situation, we've tended to use external resources to beef up the functioning of the unit, so that we can keep the normal functions happening while we take care of the areas that are deficient. Of course, while all of this is happening, we are reviewing our processes, we are looking at position descriptions, developing policies, and developing an optimal arrangement for the unit. And when that happens, when that work is complete, we will work on restructuring the unit and ensuring that it is better suited to handle the work that it has to do.
And you said, sorry. And you said this would happen before the end of this fiscal year?
Well, it's in progress at the moment. Probably the full restructuring of the unit would not be complete before the end of the year, but certainly the plans for that would be complete before the end of the year.
Chair, please, one last question.
Quick.
You spoke about mandatory and voluntary standards.
Yes.
And you raised some issues where some voluntary standards may have some significant impact in terms of the delivery of quality,
yes,
in our national public. Is there a recommendation in terms of these voluntary standards and the critical impact that it can have? Is there a document to show this recommendation, one? And two, I know you all were in collaboration with the Board of Engineers to do just going off of what Ms. Repsaroy would have spoken, in terms of a building code for Trinidad and Tobago. You know, this was supposed to have been completed and submitted since 2015. What is the status of that? And does that form part of the voluntary standards?
Well, I'll answer the last question first. It would form part of the voluntary standards, but the hope is that it would be taken up probably by the Ministry of Planning and enforced maybe through the local government bodies, that type of arrangement. We were just speculating on that. As far as the voluntary standards are concerned, I can't think of a single document that we would have, but certainly we can produce a document on any area of interest that you may have within a short period of time. The activity, I mean, the area you're talking about is one that we are very familiar with. We write about it all the time. So a specific document to suit your needs is something that we can develop very quickly.
Senator Obika.
Thanks, Chair. I apologize in advance because I will be cutting into your responses in the interest of time, right? I have 3 very short questions. The first one is you mentioned the fuel dispensers at the gas stations. Given the accusations in the public of certain gas stations having water in the gas to increase their revenue potential, what is TTBS doing about that?
At present, we don't have a program yet, but the idea is that we will be able to sample. Sorry. The idea is that we will be able to sample from the pump and do checks at that point when we roll out the verification program, which is to start in a couple of months.
Okay. And please, when that happens, if you can get some feedback to us, because that is a major concern of the public in general. The second question, as I said, there are 3, is basically, you mentioned the reference to strategic plan 2016 to 2019, so you are midstream in that plan at the moment.
Yes.
I see that you have significant cash balances at 30% of your total assets, which is, to me, unusual. Because that represents opportunity costs in terms of lost potential income, because you're having that in basically mutual funds less than 1% or just about 1% in terms of returns. Mm-hmm. What does your strategic plan say about other revenue generating possibilities, and how far along are you?
We have been looking at a number of revenue generating possibilities. The Bureau collects revenue in 2 forms. We have these mandatory activities, and then we have our voluntary services, which we offer more or less on the market.
Sorry, not to cut you. What I really wanted to ask is, how are you going to get other actors in the net, other companies in the net, under your net, that are not currently being regulated by you?
Well, generally, we work by, as far as is possible, person-to-person contact. Our services don't work very well if, broadcasting, because we need to explain all the details of them. People need to understand how they work. We also place a lot of emphasis on partnerships, being able to work with partners in developing standards-related activities, hopefully standards that people can use, other agencies in their legislation, that sort of thing. We've concentrated a lot on the private sector in the past, and these days we want to focus more on the state sector.
All right, good. The last question I have is regards TTIC. And Carnival is an essential aspect of our tourism products, and live shows key to Carnival. And perhaps the TTIC standards could look at things as sound quality, event venues, promoters, and perhaps other areas to get approvals, which may help with pay-per-view, and may help with forex generation. For example, at a carnival show, you have examples of artists complaining of feedback and poor sound quality, which definitely wouldn't augur well if you want to benefit from foreign exchange via international live stream. Is there any plan to include this aspect into the standards?
The thing is that the Bureau is guided by our stakeholders as to the areas that are considered important for our intervention. This is an area that the sound part of it especially we have looked at over the years, but we definitely prefer to work in areas where we can have partnerships with the responsible agencies to ensure that after the intervention is made, the process would continue. So once there is support for the activity, by all means, we would.
Well, I'm suggesting that it could be looked at, as well as some of these events. The sound is so loud that you wonder if it's entertainment or if it's shock value. So maybe it's something that you can look at and that may benefit us.
What we would hope is that we could offer our measurement services and calibration and traceability to the process of sound measurement to start off with. That could be used as a basis.
Well, I'm suggesting that, and I see you have a very competent marketing person. I schooled with him. So.
All right, thank you very much. Some quick questions. If you could just be crisp and pointed with your answers. I mean, we are examining accounts here from 2009 to 2013, and there is nothing really shocking about the accounts, but I think what is disturbing is that you don't have audited accounts for 14. Well, I think you have unaudited up to 14, and you don't have anything for 15, 16. When are you going to get those things up to date, audited accounts?
Okay, well, we would have completed 14 and 15. 15 just was finished this week.
Okay.
We have plans to start 15, 16 in March, and commence 16, 17 in May for completion in June.
Okay, is part of the problem that you have no internal audit capacity?
I wouldn't say that.
I think part of the problem, Mr. Chairman, is that we don't have the level of accounting expertise within the organization at present. I'd just like to point out that we have sent requests for a senior accountant forward, and I think it's been with the CPU now for quite some time, since 2012. So we await feedback, we await guidance in some of these areas. We are somewhat stymied in some respects and not being able to get the resource.
So you don't have a full complement of staff then, now, in general?
No.
And how short are you?
Well, we applied for particularly the accountant 4 position, which is a senior position, and a procurement officer also. And what we have done in order to get these outstanding financial statements brought forward, we had to bring in some outside help, which I intend to keep until we complete this exercise. As I indicated before, our intention is to comply with the Standards Act with respect to the current year's accounts.
Okay. So, but one of the problems you are living with now is that you don't have a full complement of staff. You have a problem with the the CPO in terms of the speed of response, and thirdly, you don't have the level of competency in staff that you actually require. Am I correct on all three?
Correct. And part of the exercise, of course, is a redefinition of the job descriptions in there, and all of that work is ongoing.
Okay. How would you describe your staff? Would you say that they are highly productive, or they are just like a okay functioning bureaucracy? I mean, be as straight as you can. I know you're under the public ear.
Well, Mr. Reddock controls the staff. I don't, so he can answer that.
Okay.
I think that we have similar problems to other agencies. As far as the staffing complement is concerned, the chair would have mentioned some gaps that we have. We are working on ensuring that we have a system that can properly assess the way people function. We are working with outdated job descriptions and that sort of thing. And that makes it difficult to define exactly what everybody's single function is. So we would be able to marshal and manage the forces at our disposal in a much more effective manner once that is completed. And as I said, we intend to complete at least the first part by the end of this fiscal year.
All right, I'll move on to anyone. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Mrs. Mohammed, in an earlier response, you note that you have permanent staff. So I'm assuming you have both permanent and contracted officers?
Yes, we do.
Okay, this is an area that I'm very passionate about because people ask me to advocate on their behalf. For your permanent officers who retired during the period 2000...
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
During the period 2009 to 2013, would you be able to tell me how many of the officers were able to get their pensions and gratuities in a timely manner, please?
The TTBS has its own pension fund and arrangement, and generally speaking, that process has taken place with some dispatch. We don't have people who have had to wait too long on their pension.
Too long? Okay. 2 months? 2 years?
Months.
Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, months.
Okay, so I'm going to hold it to that. So your officers, within 2 months, they usually get their pensions and gratuities?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. I commend you for that. Another question. Most of the certification, you said, is voluntary. It's not mandatory for people to be accredited, right? So I'm assuming that in order for you to get people on board, you have to do a lot of public education and sensitization, and then you have to make sure that your staff get regular training and development opportunities. What would have been your investment in training and development under the period we're reviewing? If you could send it in writing, because you might not be able to give me it now. Yeah. What would have been your investment in training and development? Were you able to reach your targets in terms of how many officers you would have wanted to train in what particular area? Also, what was your investment in public education and sensitization? And if you have a strategy going forward to ensure that the public is aware of the services that you offer and to bring more people into the program, so that instead of 1, 2, 3, 4 being accredited, we have most people in the different sectors becoming certified and accredited.
As far as the programs like that are concerned, we try to work both with the direct laboratories or companies, but we also try to work with their clients, the people who use their services, because we think it's most effective if the people who use the results of the lab demand that the results are reliable. But those are mostly institutions. It's a lot of institutional work that we try to do for those types of services. The results have been not wonderful, but we've managed to get some degree of response. But we think we have to go back to the drawing board a bit and come up with something that's more effective.
But you have a communication or campaign strategy going forward?
Oh, yes, we do, yes.
Right,
yes,
so what I want you to submit, because I know we're running out of time, would be what would be your investment, what would have been your investment for the period under review in the public education and sensitization drive, and then what is would be your investment going forward to ensure that we get what we...
Okay, all right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, through you, to the chair of the Bureau of Standards, I want to take this opportunity to commend you and your board for improving the corporate governance of that organization by getting all your financial statements and your audited financial statements done. I know that you have submitted it to the permanent secretary, and I'm sure in time it will be laid in Parliament, but I want to offer those commendations first. Now, I'm also seeing in the estimates for 2018 that you anticipate greater revenue generation in the tune of about $4 million. So before I commend yourself, Mr. Reddock, and your marketing man, Mr. London, and the board, can you tell me where you anticipate achieving this greater revenue generation from?
The revenue generated is primarily from inspections as the first area, and new inspection areas that we bring on stream. We've been working with a couple other agencies in trying to bring some things forward. One area that we are looking at in particular, since there's no longer a steel manufacturer in the country, we want to keep an eye on imported steel. The thing is that we can introduce these things, and once they are relevant, we can't just introduce them because we want to collect revenue. There is also the possibility of an increased attention to electrical items, because we think that need to work a little harder on the long-term inspection of those. In other areas, we intend to bring on stream painted roofing sheets. We've been working on painted roofing sheets so far. And then we have 1 or 2 areas in the legal metrology that we want to bring on stream as well.
Okay, excellent. Now, going back to the auditing, the internal auditing function, I still believe that it is a bit incongruent, that an organization whose core mandate is to offer external auditing, quality and standards, that you don't have an internal auditing function. I understand that you are outsourcing your auditing function, your internal auditing function. Have you done any? Now that's fine, because a lot of organizations now, they focus more on their core operations and they outsource their support functions. Have you done any cost-benefit analysis to determine whether or not it is more beneficial to outsource these functions?
We would not have considered the cost of the hiring as yet, because we haven't reached to that point where we can. But generally, it's essential for us to usually have that support in reviewing the accounts of any year before, and assist in the preparation of the accounts before the external auditor comes in. And we've always been in the habit of doing that. So I don't think we can stop that in the short term. We will, as you have recommended, look at what the eventual cost of the internal auditor on staff would be. But for the time being, we would still have to retain
of course. And one last question, or maybe a suggestion. Now I'm comparing, I think you call it the Better Business Bureau sort of model in the United States. And that is voluntary. In the absence of legislation, would the Bureau of Standards, for an important area such as medical laboratories, could they apply some sort of voluntary certification for labs? So let's say this lab is gold standard rated, is silver standard rated, etc., so that the public can see where they see outside of that lab a certification by the Bureau of Standards that they know when they enter into that lab, they do not enter to face a bunch of quacks or persons who would misdirect them. And it's serious, because you go into certain laboratories and you are misdiagnosed. So just a suggestion that perhaps the Bureau can look at that sort of system, especially where it's an important area such as medical laboratories, or if you have been looking at it, of course, you can tell us.
If I could just, that particular issue that you brought up is an area of extreme concern to the Bureau. We have voluntary standards that are available to all the laboratories to come in and be certified against. But the question of their participation, because it costs money, for one, we think has to be driven from above. And in that respect, the current efforts by the ministry to develop a national quality policy, which as part of that will look at the accreditation of laboratories, medical laboratories in particular, and perhaps provide some impetus to the Ministry of Health to get involved in this in a more active way. So we're on this. We want this to happen, and we're certainly going to be working towards that end.
Anybody else on this side? Senator Rams.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chair. In relation to your staffing, we received your management structure that was approved in 2010. But can you give us an idea of the size of your staff presently, since it's 75% of your budget?
We have about
21.
21.
At the end of December.
Employees, right?
21 employees.
21.
Oh, okay. It's 221. And I looked at the different divisions. You have 9 managers, which is for your laboratory, accreditation, your finance, HR, your methodology, your certification. Do you have a customer service division or section that deals with customers?
That function tends to fall under the marketing unit.
The marketing?
The marketing unit tends to handle that function.
The marketing unit addresses issues that customers or Trinidad Tobago citizens may
Yes.
have.
Yes.
The marketing unit, which is not on your chart, is not on your table or your structure. Is this under business development, standardization, implementation, certification, methodology, laboratory services, human resources,
Report to me.
finance, administration, where is it? And also, I would like to know how many quality officers you have at the TTBS.
Well, officers that deal specifically with the issue of quality management. We have one main quality manager. We have for all of the other quality systems that have been accredited, we have one officer for each one of them.
Well, according to your chart, this quality officer reports directly to you, the
Yes.
executive director. So
Yes.
we'll have one
Yes.
quality officer, and this inspector goes to all the different sites to review projects or products.
No, what we do, the inspection externally
Oh, it's a
is
subcontract?
done by all the standards, potentially all the standards officers. We have an inspection department
Right.
that does the inspection. The overall work of the bureau is, we consider all of that quality work. So they're just different aspects of it. So the standards officer, in inspection areas would do inspections, in certification areas they would do certification, accreditations, etc. So the different aspects would be governed by the standards officers operating
And
in that
this
context.
2021 is inclusive of all these persons, so that's permanent contract, all these staff is 2021.
Yes.
That amounts to your $45.75 million, yes?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So you have to find out which area is marketing falling under that. I can have the customer division. I do have 2 requests from you. I would like to know I would like you to submit it in writing because of the time constraints we have today. I would like to know how the TTBS deals, or what policy or procedure you have that deals with rejected goods, products, whatever you are inspecting, right? I want to know how it is that you do. And I would like to know, we heard a lot about your projects and how you're getting things corrected due to the new board and the new policies that you're probably implementing. I would like to know what is your projects that is presently ongoing, or even if you want to do it from 2008, since we are looking at 2008, 2013, the projects, the status and the costs incurred, right? And if you could say maybe if it had the subvention into it, if it's not only for the permanent staff, but if these projects had that. Because if you look at your cash flows for investing activities, you will see that the purchase of property, plant, and equipment has been increasing in debt from 2008, 2013. I don't even know what is the property, plant, and equipment that is being referenced here. That has a debt of $7 million in 2013. So I don't know what is the debt now. So, I mean, all these areas we would like some clarification on as a committee who's dealing with public accounts. What is this cost we are seeing here, right?
You get the question. You don't have to answer now. She's prepared to have it in writing for the committee.
Okay, just a clarification. When you said in debt,
well, it's in negatives.
Oh, okay.
It's negative 7.5 million. Purchase of property, plant, and equipment for that's cash flows for investing activities. So I'm guessing you would have had investment that you wanted to embark on in 2008 to whenever.
2008.
We're not even sure. right? So just prepare your project, your status, your cost, your investment projects. And I'm still hoping to hear about your marketing division that deals with the customer service division.
If I refer you to Appendix 4, it identifies the marketing officer in there and the consumer liaison officer. That's it.
The marketing
Page
officer.
number.
Okay. Thank you.
You see it?
Isn't there a consumer division in the Bureau of Standards?
Not anymore.
No. It is separate.
Yeah, in the old days when we were responsible for that,
I remember that, yes.
Yeah, but now with the Consumer Affairs Division in the
Ministry of Trade,
we still have a Consumer Affairs officer who would take in the complaints and direct them where they are required to go.
Okay. Senator Robinson, you have anything else? That's it?
Yes.
Senator Leon? MP Leon.
Yes. Just something to reiterate based on the discussions of some members. Now, the PS would have said earlier that there's a need for some form of legislative amendment to encourage collaboration, which seems to be a critical thing, and the chairman indicated his concern that some of the voluntary standards may or may not be adhered to, which could impact on some serious delivery in terms of services and information. I had asked earlier if there's some document in terms of recommendations or some form of black and white where we can indicate these are some of the voluntary standards, and if not adhered to, these are some of the risks that we as a nation, as a country, can greatly affect the product that we give in terms of service, right? And I was just thinking the Bureau of Standards, being the driver, the spearhead, the arrowhead for this, should produce a document like this. And I heard earlier when I asked about the building codes, that we're hoping that Ministry of Planning takes it up, you know, and it's as though the collaboration between the different agencies is not structured. You know, it's up to the priority of the different agencies as to how we put it together. And I'm just thinking as a nation that wants to see ourselves as a first world country, some of these things are very critical, and that some structure or some document or some recommendation should at least be in hand to first effect this way forward.
Yep, yes.
Chairman, just recently, maybe a few months ago, we completed a national quality policy. We did it through some consultants, Meso Partners, which I think was Dutch, right? And German, sorry. And we have a broad national, lots of consultations and all of that. It has been with the cabinet a while, and we expect it to come out maybe within a month or so, because we got the last set of comments there. And I do think that as that is rolled out, there will be opportunity to introduce the treatment for these gaps and that sort of thing. So I think that is something that the committee should look out for, because I think it can inform their perspective. Thank you.
Senator, quickly.
I understand it's an opportunity for gaps. I'm just saying in terms of being the indicator, the initiator, and identifying where some of these gaps may pose a critical impact in terms of the delivery of service, that instead of waiting to identify some of these gaps would have already been identified, that some things should be in black and white. That's what I'm saying.
Agreed.
Yeah.
On the issue of the building code, though, let me say that while the building code might be prepared and there might be consultation, etc., about it, at the end of the day, the enforcing agency would have to be the Ministry of Planning. I think that is where that responsibility lies. So I just mentioned that. Yeah. Senator Obika.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I would like to ask the TTBS if you can submit this in writing. Given the advancements in technology and the benefits of automation, but recognizing that automation basically is electronic application of a paper-based process or a manual process. But recognizing those benefits, and a report on how TTBS will be facilitating the industry as a whole in moving into the current age that we are in. The entire world is talking about big data, the fourth industrial revolution. Those are terms that are behind us already. But in Trinidad and Tobago, those are terms that are in front of us because we haven't as yet arrived there. Coding is an aspect. They are looking at applying technological advancements to every single service or product-driven sector of every economy, all right? The Internet of Things, et cetera, et cetera. Could a report, even if it's a brief understanding, that could be used as a framework that would show how TTBS will be doing it, even if it's simply a consideration of what your counterpart Bureau of Standards in other jurisdictions that may be at the cusp of tech, for example, in China, in certain aspects of Europe, etc. How we can do that in Trinidad and Tobago, and that could influence policymakers so you can know what to look for when we are setting industrial policy. As a request, please. Yeah.
Noted. I could just say very quickly that standards are a very strong mechanism for development of technological changes. Most issues are defined in standards. They're not usually at the cutting edge, but they usually advance far enough so that countries like ours can certainly benefit from the application.
Okay, that prompts a couple of questions. I mean, how involved are you and what role do you play with making industries in Trinidad and Tobago more competitive or pushing them towards innovation and things like that? Are you involved at all in that, and how?
Generally, we work in conjunction with clients and stakeholders in areas that that would be requested of us.
Okay. So it's on their initiative.
Primarily,
right, okay.
There are one or two areas that we would want to push, but generally we prefer, because of the nature of standards and the fact that somebody needs to use it. We find that when we go forward with issues, everybody is very happy. They say they agree, and then nothing happens afterwards. Yeah. So we prefer when there's an indication of intent that we can support, we can be guaranteed that there's some desire to persist in the activity, because it usually requires resources and effort to get success, and we want to be assured that the resources and the effort would be put forward.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add that the interest that the general public may have in having the Bureau become more forceful, as it were, and engage manufacturers. All of this, of course, would add to the cost of the business, of our operations. More staff, more facilities, more infrastructure, everything. And generally speaking, in the international community, there is pushback against having too many compulsory standards.
Yes.
The international community, as you know, like things, they prefer to have voluntary standards, as you mentioned, other people implement. So we've done, for instance, standards on compressed natural gas containers for vehicles. It is for others to implement that. We just don't have the staff to go around every shop, you know.
They can't be making the standards and policing it too, is what you're saying.
It's a challenge. But we do what we can.
Okay, one more question though. I mean, we are in a kind of difficult situation here. Exports are very important to us as a country, and we need to get our industries to export more. Are you playing any role in that at all? Are you, or can you play a role?
Yes, Chair. We can play a role in any industry that falls within our remit. What we've realized, though, is that outside of the traditional exports, the areas of food are very important. And we would like to find ways of being able to improve the standardization arrangements, even though that falls outside of what the Bureau is expected to function in. That's one area. And then the Ministry of Trade and the government in general have areas of interest that have already been expressed. And what the Bureau is trying to do now is to analyze some of those value chains and come up with areas where quality is a pivotal issue, and try to make interventions there.
Well, that would be the critical area for you, so that you basically pre-certify quality.
Yes.
And therefore you make the accessibility to other markets easier than would normally be the case.
Yes.
And I suppose to that extent you could work with Export TT or whichever the other agencies
certainly
that are directly involved in that. But you do have a critical role because you set the standards, or you can at least indicate to another country, another jurisdiction, that standards have been met and quality criteria have been met.
Yes, and there are mechanisms for that.
Does any member want to ask any other question? We're going to wrap up now. One question. Go ahead. You want something too? Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly, and you can provide this in writing. Of all the deficiencies relative to your financial auditing and accounting functions, of all the deficiencies that have been identified between the period 2009 to 2013, can you please provide to us in writing all of those deficiencies or percentage that have been rectified as of today's date? And I just want to also say that we're speaking about voluntary standards and so on. In the absence of legislative authority, the Bureau can also derive authority from your reputation for technical competence, technical proficiency. So I'd encourage you to market yourselves as technically competent and proficient, and I'm certain that you can exercise some level of authority over the standards that we all benefit from and depend on for quality.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Regarding, Mr. Reddock, regarding your submission that you prepare standards, and in line with the requests that I have of the framework, if you can submit maybe a list of the specific standards that you may have advised, for example, on the CNG gas issue, so that we have an understanding of the remit of TTBS. So when we get your framework, we can now know how to interpret. Thanks.
Just a quick question. Thank you, Chair. What is the relationship, or is there a relationship between the Bureau and the officers of the Weights and Measures Inspectorate of the Central Administrative Services, Tobago?
When the Metrology Act came into action, when it was proclaimed, the traditional weights and measures areas were basically replaced that function. What we've done with CAST in Tobago is we had been talking to them for a number of years before, and we made an arrangement with CAST to involve them in the activities that we would be doing in Tobago. So actually, just about 2 weeks ago, we went through a 9-day work period in Tobago where we went to all the supermarkets and that sort of thing, verifying the scales. We would have done that in conjunction with those officers, and they would have been the ones to tell us where to go and make the contacts with the people. So we intend to persist with that arrangement as long as it's available. Okay.
Final question to you, Mr. Dupree. Do you think, Chairman, that the Bureau has enough autonomy? I mean, you mentioned the issue with the CPO. I imagine you are accountable to the ministry, and I don't know what is the nature of that accountability. I'm going to ask the PS to close. Do you think you have enough autonomy, and do you think you have the framework that allows you to be proactive in the way that the Bureau functions, or in the way perhaps that it can play a more effective role in the country?
Well, I would certainly say that with respect to the treatment of staff and HR issues, I believe that the board, having been appointed by the ministry, has the competence to deal with more than it's currently allowed to deal with. And I will leave that there. And that is one of the areas that prevents us from evolving into a high-performance organization. It's the HR issues. So that unless we can find a way to fast-track some of these issues, we are going to be bogged down by a long period of having staff that are perhaps demoralized in some way, but not operating at the full level of productivity. So I think the Act refers us to the minister. The minister is the one that is supposed to approve certain issues beyond a certain level. And we can't tell the minister how to do her work, or his work. So I think that's one area that I think that we're going to engage some discussions with the minister to see what is possible in terms of either amending the legislation or having a new view of how we do things.
I didn't give you an opportunity at the beginning to do a framing, but I'll give you the opportunity now. You've heard everything, and you've been with us. If you want to make some closing remarks, I'd be grateful.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think that the Bureau's function is pivotal to development in terms of Trinidad and Tobago, in terms of the economic welfare, in terms of exports, imports, because of the role in standards that is critical. We in the ministry have been engaging the Bureau in the policy environment in particular. And we have the Metrology Act, which we have identified key performance areas where we expect the Bureau to play that fundamental role in changing not just the processes, but the culture of quality. And that is stated in the Act itself, the innovation and the quality culture. And to the extent that the Bureau is able to be successful in that area, that helps us as a nation and various stakeholders to move the quality agenda forward. It is hoped that with the introduction of the National Quality Policy, that will add a certain level of coordination nationally, and the Bureau has a fundamental role to play in that. So from the general perspective, we see the role of the Bureau as indispensable to our development. You mentioned the issue of things taking long. Just yesterday, we had a discussion at the Trade Facilitation Committee, and we were saying that what is really needed is the shift in the mindset of how you achieve things. So for instance, the project that we have that is 5 years, that does not mean that the benefits will accrue at the end of 5 years. So like for instance, the current component is 9 months. We expect to see benefits emanating from 3 months down the road, and there are things that can be done outside of the project, and we encourage that. So we would like to see the Bureau to have that mindset shift in terms of what we are to achieve as a nation. So I think that, so that even the 11 million that they get annually, 10 or 11 million, if they could whittle down that and expand the revenue base, then we would encourage that. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you all very much, and thank you, all of you, from the Bureau, from the Ministry, and my own colleagues here around the table. And I also want to thank the press for being present today, and hope they will be a good mediator between our work here and what the public is able to read and to see. I will mention, as I close, some of the things that we might want to consider in the recommendations that we might give, because these reports go to Parliament and the recommendations are then taken into account by the Minister, and the Minister actually responds and says, well, I can do this, I cannot do this, or I will get this done by so-and-so. So it's a good way of the committee helping you to do your work once we understand what are your challenges and what are your opportunities. So I would say that the issue of self-sufficiency for the Bureau should be pursued, but I don't think it should be dropped like a hatchet. I think it should be phased, and we would make a recommendation of that kind. Secondly, I think the issue of legislation to bring food and drugs and standards and other standards, so to speak, under one entity, with the Bureau playing the role on behalf of Trinidad and Tobago with the rest of the world, I think that would be a key issue. I think I've watched this as a spectator and as a participant for too long. It has to come to an end. This kind of jurisdictional disputes that always end up with national insufficiency and deficit. I think that we need to have legislation to deal with this. And then the coordination role of the TTBS, it seems to me, must become a mandate so that it can be the institution and the face that certifies standards to the outside world, as well as whatever it does inside. Chairman, I want to urge you, I know you are on this track, but to bring the audited accounts up to date so that you can be on a good platform. I want you to take note of the position by members here that the medical labs are something that might be treated as a priority. And I take the issue of autonomy, and we will, I'm not clear in my own mind yet, but I take that issue, the greater jurisdictional responsibility over your own business, to be something that might be addressed in a recommendation to the ministry. Because if you don't have a fair amount of autonomy over your affairs, it'll be very, very hard to be able to fulfill the mandate that is expected of you, and you will always fall short. But for an organization that is receiving a relatively small subvention and has the capacity to be self-sufficient, I think if these things are achieved, greater autonomy would be an appropriate reward so that it can do the mandate, do the business of the state, and at the same time do the business of the citizens of this country. So I thank you very, very much. I thank the press, and good afternoon to each and every one of you.